And what's up, guys? So, hey, we are in week 4 of our series on dating and romance and things of the like called Are You the One? And so, we're going to be continuing going through the life of Samson in the book of Judges. If you have a Bible, I invite you to grab it. We're going to be in the book of Judges as we continue to look at the life and observe the life of Samson and see how God wants to apply it to us. But to kind of set up where we're going, whenever I was younger, I would say I would probably be labeled as like a pyromaniac. I just remember the first time grabbing my mom's lighter and her white rain spray can and like making a torch. Anybody ever did that? And just making the torch, man. This is awesome. And I was in elementary school. And so from there, we just started burning everything, right? We're like, let's just burn paper and quickly put it out. And then let's burn sticks and then try not to, burn everything else on fire. And so we'll quickly put it out and burn the neighbor's cat. And I'm not really, we're just joking. I'm just kidding. Okay. I know that's a lob, it's an easy one. But one time I decided, you know what we're going to do? Because I'd watch like treasure hunting movies where they go down the caves and they have like the torches and all that stuff. And I was like, let's make our own torch. And so we decided we would take a bunch of my socks and we would tie it around a stick. And so we did this and we went to the back alley, and there was a place where we just put the stick down into the grass there, and we lit it on fire. And see, in the movies that I'd watched at this point, the torch always stayed on fire and nothing else happened. It just kind of stayed there, and I was like, this is going to be cool. We're going to watch this in awe as a bunch of little elementary kids seeing it burn. Well, that's not what happens. Just so you know, whenever you tie socks around a stick, if that's ever something that you're like, I think I'm going to do that. Whenever they light on fire, they start to drip whenever they are burning. And so they started to drip. And about that time, I noticed that all the grass around it was all dead. And so it drips, flames go out. It just starts spreading quickly. And all of us, we're like, ah! And we all run, and I go and I go inside my house. I had a shirt on. I changed the color of the shirt that I was wearing. I changed my hair to make it look like it wasn't me. And I was riding my bicycle just around the neighborhood, trying to figure out what was going to go on. Because my granny, she lived right across the street from us, and she calls and she's like, "Hey Travis," I'm like, "Yeah, Granny," and she goes, "Yeah, do you happen to know anything about the fire that's directly behind your house that has a bunch of socks that were burned?" And I was like, "Oh, you mean the one that was right in that patch of grass right behind our house in the alleyway?" She's, "Yes." And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I was just caught. There was nothing I could do. She was like, "We both know that you're grounded for a long time." Luckily, nothing was burned down as far as houses and things like that, because it really could have. Fire trucks were called and everything. It was crazy. Now, you might be going, okay, well, what does that have to do with relationships? Well, tonight we're talking about our sexuality and specifically seduction. And there's a classic illustration, and how this connects to the story I just shared is, it's been said that sex is like a fire. In the right context, like a fire pit or a fireplace, it brings warmth and enjoyment. But in the wrong context, it can spread quickly and cause much destruction and pain. And we're going to look at that, and we're going to see fire, specifically in his life. We're going to see it in the wrong context and what happens to him as he is seduced. And we're going to see how this can apply to our lives as we look at this topic of being tempted and falling into seduction in our own lives. But we're going to see it play out in Judges 16. We'll look at the first 6 verses, and then we'll jump down to verse 15 after that and read verse 15 to 22. But 16 verse 1 begins by saying, Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. Well, that's one way to start time in the Word of God. This is still the Bible, okay? Verse 2, it says, the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. So basically he says, I am the king of the hill, y'all lose. And he has this supernatural feat of strength. And so he gets away from the Philistines' attack. Verse 4, it says, and after this he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him, i.e. humiliate him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound so that one could subdue you. And you think right here, he might go, I wonder if she isn't completely pure in her motive here. But we'll continue on. So what happens is, 3 times he lies to her as she says, how can I subdue you? And he says 3 different ways, and all of them are a lie. And he gets away from the attack of the Philistines that try to subdue him and try to bound him and imprison him. He gets away until, verse 15, we'll pick it up, the 4th time. It says, and she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Now remember, the Nazirite vow had a few things, and one of those things was that if you should not cut the hair of your head. That's part of the ways that God separated him in his call on Samson's life. And so he tells her this about him and how he will be weakened. It says, when Delilah saw, verse 18, that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times, and I will shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. Man, that got intense. This was a real eye-opening moment. Okay. The Philistines were having a ball, though, because they had his eyes in there. Okay. It says, and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved, which is a key detail that we're going to go back to for tonight as we close. But a lot here about how he fell into seduction and what seduction does to us. But right here at the beginning, the first point tonight, as Delilah is the personification of seduction. Obviously, she was somebody that was very attractive to him, that would pull him in, that he would think was a good-looking person. And she's kind of the personification of seduction and how it could work in his life and also in ours. But the first point this evening is this: seduction is the enemy's setup to take you out. It's the enemy's setup. So he's in Gaza, and in Gaza, this is actually the capital, Philistine capital city. So he is living in enemy territory, sleeping with the enemy, literally. One commentator, Dr. David Jeremiah, said this: Samson's excursion into the depths of the enemy's territory reveals the extremes to which his sensual desires took him, i.e., living by his senses caused him to lose all sense. And this is what happens to us as well, but certainly what happened to him. At some point, he just quit caring. And he quit caring about where he was in enemy territory, and he quit caring what God wanted for his life and from him as far as the purpose that God had called him to. And what happens is sin and sexual desire, whenever we fall into lust and seduction, it causes us to live in enemy territory in a couple of ways. Sexual sin, seduction, it numbs us. It numbs us to God. And then secondly, it numbs us to the pain that our sexual sin's actually doing to our own hearts. And this was my story. That I lived this point. Like maybe you're like me, like raise your hand, by just a moment of truth here, honesty here. Raise your hand if you would say, I did not get the sex talk from my parents. I did not. If you did not, raise your hand. Okay, that's a good portion of the room here tonight. So I did not get the sex talk from my parents. And actually, whenever I did have any of that kind of happen, like I remember my dad, I remember getting very unbiblical teaching. So not only was there no teaching, but when I did get teaching later on in my teenage years, it was very unbiblical. I remember lying to a girl that was much older than me, about my age, and we were doing things and crossing lines. And I remember we were at the lake, and my dad actually like yelled across the lake, like, way to go, son. And like, it was a weird moment, super awkward. But it is part of my story. And man, like I remember getting this, and it's like, it just didn't set me up with how do I respond to temptation and seduction in my life. And then when it came to the teaching of the church, I would say it was nominal at best. It was basically like, hey, sex is bad, save it for your spouse. And I'm like, there's confusion there. I don't understand. And I just wasn't prepared when I started falling into sexual temptation, because I was like, this doesn't seem so bad. So like what's actually true here? I just didn't have a good understanding. And so, but as we go into to see sex outside of the fireplace, I want to talk to you about sex in the fireplace really fast. God's design for sex, that it's supposed to bring warmth and enjoyment and connection to a husband and a wife. And so what's fire in the right context? What is sex in the right context? Well, it's within the covenant of marriage, is what God created it for. And it's meant to be this gift that binds two people together. And in Genesis 2:25, it says that Adam and Eve are naked before each other and they feel no shame. And the reason why that's so cool in a couple of ways, but one of the ways is that they have eyes for only each other. She is his standard of beauty and vice versa. That's in this context of lifetime commitment and trust. In this context, the marriage bed is the safest place on earth. And this is how God designed sex to be. And this is actually the kind of love that we all desire. I know this because even in the movies, this is the kind of love that like Hollywood celebrates and that we celebrate. Like that I'm going to be with you till death do we part, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm committed and I love you with a love that's going to last. Like we want that. Here's the problem. Is our culture teaching us how to get that kind of love? The answer is a resounding no. Like we're in a culture that desires selfless love while glorifying seduction and lust. And this is where there's a disconnect, because whenever you glorify seduction and lust, there's some problems. One of them is this, that seduction, man, it's going to do this. It removes love from the equation. It's what happens. Like seduction, it's selfish. If you want to write something down, that's the next point, that seduction is selfish. This is fire outside the fireplace. Look at verse 1. Whenever he says he sees her and he has sex with her, it's no longer this binding, intimate thing. It's just a transaction. Love's completely removed from the equation because he's just following his own lust. It's no longer this intimate thing. It's abuse of its intended purpose according to God. It would be like you see somebody using and cutting up vegetables to put in the salad for people that do that kind of thing. And they take it and you see what they're cutting on the cutting board they're using, and you see that they're actually using an iPad as the cutting board. You'd be like, if that's not made for that, wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? And this is what God's trying to tell us with how we have taken this thing that he created to be this wonderful thing, but we've removed it from its proper context, and so the fire has spread, and it's caused a lot of chaos in our culture in so many different ways. But one of the ways is that seduction, it teaches you how to be a selfish lover. That's what it does. And he falls into sexual temptation, and that's what happens with him instead of following God's design. It's using someone This is what happens in verse 1. He's using her instead of loving her. And that's what seduction does. I remember whenever I was running from God. And I wish this wasn't a part of my story. I mean, I have three daughters now, but it is. And I was making out with a girl. We did not end up having sex that night, but definitely crossed lines. And I remember as we were making out, she said, "Do you even like me?" And I looked at her right in her eyes, and I lied straight through my teeth, and I said, "Of course I like you." And I used her. And that's what seduction does. And the crazier thing is, man, she believed me. She believed me, and that's what seduction, it causes you to fall for the lie, which is the next point that we're gonna dive into, is that seduction, not only does it's selfish, but it lies to you. It lies to you. And actually, verse 4, if you look at verse 4, the name Delilah is very, very important. It says that he fell in love with the woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, I just want to give a caveat. If you're here, your name is Delilah, I'm sure you're awesome. At least I hope so. But the Hebrew name, Delilah, it has an interesting meaning. It actually means to dangle. And so it's like this false promise of this carrot that you're never actually going to get. It's Delilah, lies actually in the name as well, which I thought was fascinating. But it's this false promise that's dangling in front of you. That's what seduction, it does. It deceives you into falling for a lie. Like a couple weeks ago, to quote theologian Taylor Swift, in her song 15, she says, because when you're 15, somebody tells you that they love you, you're going to believe them. And that's a song about somebody who gave themselves to someone who wasn't actually going to love them. And then if you jump down 7 years later, she's talking about in her song 22, she says, "It feels like a perfect night for breakfast at midnight, to fall in love with strangers. Yeah, we're happy, free, confused, and lonely at the same time. It's miserable and magical. Oh yeah. Tonight's the night when we forget about the deadlines. It's time. Oh. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 22. Everything will be all right if you keep me." Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, we get it. And so here's the thing. If I could talk to her, I'm like, "Taylor, this is why the list of guys is so long." 7 years later, we're still struggling with the same things. We're still struggling with, like, how about not falling in love with strangers? How about that's not a good idea? And getting swept up in the moment of seduction, that's what happens. And this is what happens with Samson. He gets swept up in the seduction of the moment, and man, he gets swept up into the lies in the moment. And I want to answer the question, what are some of the subtle lies that he falls into, and what are some of the lies that we fall into? And so I want to share 5 lies that are in this passage, whether outright or implied. 5 lies of seduction. The first one is the lie is attention equals affection. Attention equals affection. So we know that she had an ulterior motive. Like they say that you're going to get 1,100 pieces of silver if you seduce him. She had this hidden motive that he didn't know about. And so she gave him attention, but he did not have her heart. How many of y'all have ever felt like someone wanted your attention, but they didn't actually want you? This happens quite often. She wanted the attention, but she didn't want the person. See, getting attention doesn't equal affection, and he got her attention. And so why does this matter? Because just like him, what happens is we get the attention of someone, and then we fall head over heels for that person. It says that he fell in love with her, and we are head over heels, and we give ourselves away to this person, and it leads to us being hurt. We find ourselves in this painful place when we fall into this lie. Attention, it's got to equal affection. And here's what Samson desired. He had the same desire and longing that we all have. Like your deepest longing and your deepest desire is that you would be fully known, right? And that you would be fully loved. Every person on the planet desires this. And I'm telling you, the place that's found is in Jesus alone. That you would realize that this God is asking you to go to him tonight. that you would realize what God can do in your life. But Samson, he wasn't looking to God for the love that he longed for. And so he fell for the lie, like so many of us, including myself, have at times. The second lie is this, that I believe that he certainly believed is the sex is worth the sacrifice. The sex that I'm going to get is going to be worth the sacrifice. Like, when I read this passage and I read the life of Samson, especially with Delilah, I'm like, how does he not know? Like, how can you be asked so many times and be one, she's trying to trap you over and over and over, and this is the fourth time. Samson, what's going on? As I thought about that question, how does he not know? I realized, actually, I think he does. But I think he thought, you know what, but the moments that we have and the sexual connection we're sensing together and falling into temptation together, I think that it's worth it. Whenever I decided to run from God, in my heart, I chose that I would rather have sex than be in a right relationship with God as I ran from the Lord. Like, I believed that God was trying to keep me from some sort of pleasure and what was actually going to be better in my life and what was actually good. And I didn't actually say those words outright. I didn't say, God, I don't want you, I'd rather be able to have sex and stuff like that. But that's what my actions showed. And I think that maybe there's other people that you're in the same boat that I was in at one point. But I just want to tell you this, God's design for your life is going to lead to the most pleasure in your life, ultimately. And I really, really believe that because I have been following Jesus for some time now, and I've been on the other side, and man, it's better. And that's why you hear testimonies every single Sunday night. It's better, it's better, it's better. Would you realize the God who is better is saying, you can come to me, and you can experience what I have for you. But I thought, man, it's worth it. And Samson, he believed that the sex and sexual sin that he would fall into would be better, and so he fell for that lie. Another lie, and the third lie of the five is that outer beauty is greater than inner character. Outer beauty is greater than inner character. It's painfully obvious the amount of times that he falls for someone because his eyes have led him astray. The word seduce is the lust of the eyes. The lust of the eyes, that I'm pulled by what I see and I'm going to go by what I want in that moment because my eyes are leading me. It's outer beauty, not inner character that he's concerned with. And that's painfully obvious as you read this text. But she can seduce him. Why? Because she is hot. In seduction, what happens is seduction promises satisfaction. And it's an empty promise. And it could be pornography. It could be a person. It could be a lot of things that lead us astray. But this is the lie that Samson believes. And part of us, like if I was to ask you, hey, if I make the statement, hey, character matters more than what a person looks like, my guess is most people in the room are not going to go, I don't know. I think that we go, yeah, of course that matters. But I think we follow it up quickly because we don't actually put this in practice very well. And we go, but, I mean, is 9 or 10? Like, can she be a 9 or a 10? Is that good? Or he be a 9 or a 10? Like, it does kind of matter, though, because I really do want them to be super, super, super attractive and amazingly beautiful. And so this is what happens is we don't look at their inner person. We look at only the outer person. And, man, I was able to go to a celebration of a couple that it was their 50th wedding anniversary. And so not many people get to stay together for 50 years. Like, that's a very long time. And, man, we celebrated such a cool moment. And whenever he got up there and he shared about, man, what has caused you to have such strong love for each other throughout the decades, you know what he didn't say? He didn't go, man, even today when she puts on a bikini, woo-wee. Like 75-year-olds in bikinis, let me tell you. Listen, I'm sure that she is still his standard of beauty because he has eyes that have been trained for her and her alone, which is a beautiful thing. But we understand gravity wins, right? It's true. Gravity is going to win versus you. You won't beat gravity. Here's the point. Looks should not be the first thing on your list. Looks should not be the first thing on your list. If you want to write something down, you can write this. You want soul level, not skin level. Soul level is greater than skin level. That was good. It is good. And because it's true, like that's what you really, really want. And so he believed, man, the outer person matters more than inner person. And he fell for the lie of seduction in that way. And then the fourth thing is this. He believed this lie. If I give in, I get to keep her. If I give in, I get to keep her. And look at verse 15, and then we'll look at verse 17. Verse 15, it says that she says to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You've mocked me. And then verse 17, because of that, it says, and he told her all his heart. And he tells her everything. And the reason why is because he knew there were boundaries. There's things that he should keep to himself, but he crossed that line. How does this apply to us? There are people that I've talked to plenty of times that they say, well, if I have sex with the person, it's going to make them happy. And so that's why I'm struggling with this topic. Not because I'm struggling with what God says, but because I want this person to be happy. Let me just reword what that means if that person's saying, you having sex with me is going to make me happy if you are not married. This is what that means. It makes the other person happy to go against God's design and for you to compromise your faith. I'll say that again. I know that has a lot of weight to it. It makes the other person happy for you to compromise your faith and to go against God's design for your life. Now, if you're here and maybe you're dating couple and maybe you've been dating for quite some time, like you're here, most of you or many of you are here because you're going like, I want to learn what God has to say for this topic in my life. That's why I'm here. But man, hey, Travis, man, I still struggle. I've still struggled in this area. Are you saying like that's my heart? And I just want to give the caveat. Listen, to be sexually attracted to somebody that you're dating is not a bad thing. I would actually say that is a good thing. God is not saying, no, that's not good. God is saying, wait, it's not the right time. And then as you do things like Tyler mentioned last week, it's cuffing season, right? Like everyone's getting engaged. As you get engaged and as you take more steps and you connect with each other emotionally and spiritually and intellectually, like you also want to connect with each other physically. I would say, again, that's very normal for sexual attraction to actually be even stronger as you are together a longer amount of time. Like, and I've been there. Whenever Carrie and I were engaged, it got way more difficult, and we had to have even more boundaries because she kept on just trying to come on to me. I was like, babe, you got to stop. I'm joking. If Carrie was here, she'd be like, yeah, okay. But what happens is we desire each other, and that's not a bad thing. How do you fight that? Because I would say that's not all bad, and I understand the struggle there. Here's how you fight that. More than I want you physically, I want to be right with God spiritually. More than I want and I desire to have sex with you, I want God to be the center of our relationship together. And that thought right there is how you're going to fight and create the boundaries that are going to be necessary for you to keep the fire in the fireplace. And then finally, the fifth lie, because Samson, he gives in definitely to that one as well. The fifth lie that he believes is this, is I am strong enough to stay beside what seduces me. Over and over and over again, he believes I'm strong enough to stay beside Delilah. Verse 20 and 21, we see this whenever he finally falls and his strength had left him and he didn't know it, that God had actually left him and said, fine, you want to go your own way? I'll let you go. And he says that I'm going to shake free just like I did before. I'm going to get free from these Philistines, which were the enemies of God, right? These are the enemies of God who were against his people. And then in verse 21, it says the Philistines seized him. They trapped him. What happens is we're seduced and then we fall into a trap. And here's why you can't stay beside what seduces you. Here's why he couldn't and we can't either. Because seduction, what happens is it leads to self-deception. Seduction leads to self-deception. This word seduce, and they're going to have it, the definition of it for you to be able to write down. The Hebrew word here is patah, okay? And so this word's definition is this: to be in a state of holding a wrong view about a situation, implying the one deceived bears some responsibility as a kind of self-deception. So seduction, it leads to self-deception. So, here on stage, I have a mosquito zapper. And what it does is it zaps mosquitoes. And so I'm here all night just for explanation, you know. But what happens is the mosquito sees the blue light or whatever, something along those lines, draw it in. And let's just pretend they can think. and so they're going through and they're like, man, that looks really good. I'm going to go towards that, not knowing or thinking about the consequences on the other side. And this is what happens with Samson. I'm just going to go towards that. Okay. Samson and Delilah is mosquito meets zapper. That's a picture of the word seduction for us tonight. If you're like me and you like words with pictures, here it is. Okay. That's what happens. We get drawn in and we get pulled in, and we get pulled in thinking about only the moment, and the lie we fall into itself, and we fall into the self-deception as we justify what we want to do in that moment, and we find ourselves in a place we didn't want to be. I was talking with a guy. He was in I would say one of the more wild party fraternities. Like if I said the name of the fraternity he was in, most of y'all would look at your friend and be like, yeah, that's true. And so he was in this frat, and he was dating a girl, and she ended up breaking up with him because they were struggling with crossing lines that she did not want to cross. And he was not a follower of Jesus, and he didn't understand why this was such a problem, and what's the big deal with Christians and sexuality. He was so confused, and he was like, hey, why can we just meet, man? And so we sat down and we started talking, and then he was like, I just don't understand it. Like, what's the problem? And as I was here, I said, well, man, tell me your story. And he talked to me about, well, I got to college and I wanted to do everything that college had to offer. Yeah, I love going to the darties and all that stuff. And he started sharing. And as I asked him more questions, he started sharing about the different things that happened and the things that he had fallen into sexually. And he made this statement as we were talking. He said, I hurt a lot of girls over the last year. And I used a lot of people, and honestly, I don't like that, and that's not really who I want to be. And I use that as the launching pad to talk about how God's design, it leads to our flourishing in every area of our life, including our sexuality, and how whenever we go outside that design, it leads to decay. Just like a couple weeks ago when I said, man, it brings pleasure to the body, but it rots the soul, right? That's what happens, and that's the life that I was living for a period of time. So I knew where this guy was at. He realized something inside of him was hurting himself, and his heart wasn't in the place that he wanted it to be. And he started to think about that. And a lot of people, they're going to say, well, but it's just sex. And that's one of the conversations we had. It's like, man, it's just sex. Like if it's two consenting people if they wear protection, like what's the problem? I don't understand. And I would say, man, there's actually a pretty simple answer to that. According to God, sex is not just two bodies, but it's two hearts. And listen, you can wear protection on the body, but you cannot wear protection on the heart. And it's going to involve your heart. And there's a lot of science, by the way, that goes into this. I could make this point without the Bible, but the Bible certainly makes this point. It's taking it outside of God's design. And it leads to someone that you don't actually want to be, and somewhere that you don't actually want to go. Seduction, what happens is it leads to you being subdued. Like in verse 6, it says, how can one subdue you? That word subdued, it literally means, because we don't use that word a lot, it literally means affliction. How could one bring hurt and pain into your life? The enemy, again, this is the setup. This is what took me out for years. I could have been running towards Jesus. But instead, I ran away because I believed all the lies and all the things that we're talking about. I wish I would have heard this message, man. But it means affliction. And here's the thing for him, how does he fall into affliction? Because oftentimes we don't fall for the immediate thing in front of us. Like the immediate sins and the immediate pay for it. It's always later, right? It's not immediate, but eventual for Samson. And for a lot of us, it's not immediate that we see the negative side effect of going outside God's design, but it's eventual. And this eventually, it leads to a very, very bad place for him. One of the places that we get to talk with people a lot about where it happens eventually, the payment comes later, is in the subject of pornography. We get to talk with people every single week on staff. And by the way, people are getting set free from porn on a regular basis here. And God can set you free. I want you to know that. And because of Jesus, we fight from victory, not for it. And it's a powerful thing that God can do. But I meet with people and they say, well, I was just curious whenever I was little. So a lot of times it's even elementary school, before your bodies have even started to have puberty happen to them and all that. Like you still have this curiosity, and so they're just curious, and then they start looking at it, and then it starts to just slowly but surely the hooks are set in, and now people can't even go to sleep without watching it. It wasn't immediate, but it was eventual. And I want to let you know that there's a God who's saying, hey, I can free you from whatever it is that has a hold on you. But there's a trap that's been set for you. And this might be one of the traps that God's trying to keep you from. Like, here's a question that I ask a lot in these kinds of sermons. What if God is trying to actually not keep you from pleasure, but keep you from pain? What if that's God's heart for you? Not to keep you from pleasure, but to actually keep you from pain and lead you to what's going to be ultimately most pleasurable for your life. Because here's the truth. If he could fast forward, and if I could have fast forwarded and seen all of the shame and all the things I would have to work through because of that, all the sins that I chose, man, if he could fast forward, I just don't think he would have chose it. If he could fast forward and see, hey, you're going to lose your eyes. You're going to be enslaved. Your strength's going to be gone. And you're going to be mocked by the enemies of God living there. I don't think that he would have chose that, but as we think about that, I would say that's true in my own life. And my deepest shame that I've had to struggle with is from my sexual sin. From the people that I hurt, from the one-night stands that I drunkenly, just, if that's a word, I fell into, and the drunken nights. And I just wasn't even thinking as I'm blackout drunk and I wake up and I think, man, I can't believe that I chose to do that with someone I didn't even know. And it had a hold on me, but I want you to know, and this is why verse 22 is so key, God's grace goes deeper than your deepest shame. It does. And I just want to say this. It's a very, very simple point, something that we say a lot here. But the final point I want us to write down tonight is this, is God isn't done with you. God is not done with you. God was not done with Samson. It's very fascinating. If you look at verse 22, it says, but the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. What does this mean? Why is this important? Samson's strength came back. God's grace was not done with him, and God's grace was not done with me. God's grace is not done with you. Maybe in this area of life, and maybe it's just another area of life, but maybe in this subject, you feel like, man, in so many ways, I feel like I've just face planted over and over and over again. I want to share something with you that, man, it just was so good to hear it for me. A guy named Nick Vujicic, he said this. He said, don't let your face plant grow roots. Don't let your face plant grow roots, meaning you don't have to stay there. It says that God, Jesus, is the lifter of our heads. And I want you to know that for every sin, now however many sins that you have within you, I can promise you as the person who share and saying this right now, that, man, for every single sin that is in this room, there is a Savior that wants to save you. For every single mess up, there is the mercy of God that Jesus is saying, I want to forgive you. For every single hurt in this room, and I know that, man, there's so many in this kind of numbers in a room. I know that there's all kinds of hurts and all kinds of baggage. For every hurt, there is a healer. Scripture says that by his stripes we are healed, that Jesus went to the cross, that he was beaten and he was battered and he was bloodied and he was placed up there, and it was so that way I could be healed and so you could be healed. And he has his arms open, saying, would you come to me and would you let all of your shame melt in the embrace of our Savior? Would you come to Christ? Will you turn to God and let his grace do a deep cleaning of your soul? Jesus has done so much in my life, man. All the baggage, he's like, he just set me free. I know what it is to walk around and to be light in my soul. Because I have had my shame melted away in the arms of his grace. It's changed everything for me. And now where I was once living an ungodly life, there's a lot of people that would say, man, I'm a godly man. And I can promise you I'm pursuing that endeavor that I would be a godly man. And I would say, man, I'm pursuing with my own family to have a godly family. Just this week, my daughter Cassie was talking with my wife Carrie. And they were at our house, and Cassie looks at my wife Carrie and says, this is our church, and talking about our house. And Carrie was like, teaching moment. And she goes, what do you mean this is our church? And Cassie responded and said, well, the church is where people who love God gather, and that's our family. Here's why that's powerful for me, man, because I would not have said that growing up. But when God changes a life, he changes a legacy. And Jesus has changed everything for me. And I get to walk free now. And the same Jesus is saying, would you step into the freedom that God has for you? And maybe you're going, okay, well, how? How can I let God's grace define my life? Well, verse 28, it simply says, Samson cries out. It says, Samson called to the Lord. What made his strength come back? He finally cried out to God. Will you cry out to God? Will you call out to the Lord? All of us can call out to the Lord tonight. Would you pray with me? Would you just say this to God genuinely in your heart, every person? I invite you to say this. God, I'm calling out to you. Speak to me, God. Do what you want to do with my life. It's yours. Let his grace melt away any shame and hurt that might be in your heart as his love changes everything for you. Let's worship.
If you need to talk with somebody, just